innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software. You're invited to join our MEP and Construction Innovation Adventure with a mission to propel this great industry forward. My guest today is Kevin Soohoo, Director of Construction and Engineering at Egnyte. With 15 plus years of experience in the context space, Kevin is responsible for supporting Egnyte's newly formed construction and engineering vertical and its growth efforts within AEC. He also has a history of leading technology and innovation at E&R Ranked specialty trade contractors and context startups. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thanks, Todd. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So I always love to hear everybody's origin story of how they got into the construction industry.
Yeah. Oh boy, where do we start? But it's been a bit of a journey, 15 years, but it's been a good journey, and there's still more to be done. But yeah, it started 2006 or so. I had just come out of the global manufacturing space, and sort of construction was entering into this kind of similar, like, oh, we're going digital. We need to do more out in the operational space, level up our IT. And I found my way to an MEP contractor over here in the Bay Area, California, where they needed IT help, but they, at the same time, they also said, look, we really want to figure out what the strategy is around technology. How can we get it into the field? A lot of it was because of their customers, right? Bay Area, you're talking about doing projects for a lot of these tech companies, which kind of be unnamed, but we got to show up with tech. We just can't be rolling in job sites, pencil and paper, when we're building data centers and things like that. So it was an interesting start where MEP contractors said, we got to level up, bring in somebody with that background, which I had. And then from there, it was really interesting. We've had, before construction technology was a thing, there was a few of us that were really trying to push that early on. And the challenge then was, like, there wasn't much that was specifically made for AEC, or let alone a subcontractor at the time. So much of that was shoehorning in certain things that were maybe built for other industries. And we made some of that work. And at the same time, iPads came out. That was a thing. And just at the same time, a little company called PlanGrid came out, and it was really interesting. We found a way to make iPads work. We started with 5 users way back in the beginning. And when I left, we were probably 120 users all in on PlanGrid. So some of these early plays like PlanGrid, we've got to see a little bit of Procore, a little bit of some of these other solutions that we know about, was all part of sort of our strategy. Let's test out some of these startups, these early stage products, because we're hungry to see what it can do for us, how we can get more productivity out of our team, sort of smooth over some of these communication frustrations, with the office and field especially. So yeah, that's kind of where I've been. And then through some of these early stage startups that we were testing, one in particular, Rumbix was one that came along. And a lot of what they were doing around productivity analytics was really resonating with us. And what had happened then at that point was, had done my run, I think, on the construction side, and then that's where an opening came up with Rumbix to help drive some of their sales and some of the go-to-market. And it was a nice transition where I then transitioned out from that customer mindset into more of that seller mindset. But it was nice because I could identify with, walking in those shoes, saying, hey, I understand we've got some challenges, and especially for what, we were doing at that time with Rumbix, which is we need to get better with your budget and your analytics and how your labor is getting burned. So it was a nice transition from, moving out of that contractor space and then into sort of that solution or software space. And then right after that was another company, Dado, where, I think you had Jake on, and you had Walker on in the past episode, Google for a construction project. And there I was early on with them, helped build up their sales and marketing and customer success function. And then now I'm with Egnyte, and I'm new there, about 4 weeks in. So it's been an interesting ride so far.
Nice. That's awesome. So let's go back to those kind of early days for a second, do a little detour. The contact report was cool days. What do you think is one of the kind of the main lessons that you learned from that time period?
I think the big one was the people. It's a cliche, people, process, technology, but back in the 2006, 2010 kind of time frame, The people side was something where, IT would go off, they'd go find a solution, they deploy it, and then it would just suck because it would make someone's life harder. And that's a big learning lesson that we had in the early days, which is we got to really look at, the field and how their workflow is happening and what will change when you start to introduce, at the time, new technology. A lot of it's not so new these days, but where we're really changing the way people are working, and to a point like, will it actually help them at the end of their day, go home a little bit earlier, not have to work, or get on, have the overtime or things of that nature. And it was really a big focus around the people side of things, right? We're changing the way how work gets done. We're trying to preach this kind of work-life balance as best as we can. And so the people side, and knowing, hey, what's going to happen? Can we involve them early on and not sort of have this over the fence mentality of here's some new stuff, go run with it, was a big learning lesson for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, coming in from the manufacturing, going into the construction industry, what kind of overlap do you see there, and maybe lessons that we can pull from manufacturing?
Yeah, where it's like a circle, right?
Yeah.
We've got DFMA and prefab and that whole manufacturing mentality, which is, I spent 10 years in that space. So, the lean principles, Six Sigma, Kanban, some of these that we see now in the construction space was all things that I had gone through, in the manufacturing side. So it's kind of interesting that, we've got the same problems, which is waste and wasted time and rework and doing things over that we shouldn't have had to done. And so there is a huge overlap, as you point out, with manufacturing and the lessons learned there. And also, manufacturing sort of digital disruption, if you want to call it that, back in those early 2000s. Construction is very much living through that now. I wouldn't say we're in the beginnings of that. We're probably in the middle somewhere of that, but lean construction and all those things are certainly things that I've seen in my past life for sure.
Yeah, it's funny how those kind of trend lines pop up in different industries, and they follow similar trajectories. I think construction has the added benefit of being able to look at manufacturing and see what worked well and even what didn't work well, and how they can improve it and what they need to do to tweak it for this industry.
Yeah. Supply chain being a big function of that too, and that's also being considered now. So that it's very holistic from sort of that construction perspective. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, really want to spend the bulk of our time focusing in on data and different trends there that you're seeing from your vantage point. What do you think is one of the bigger trends surrounding data that you've noticed so far this year?
Data, explosion might be an understatement, but I think there's been a couple of course, coming out of last year in the pandemic and sort of this force, if you will, to remote work for a lot of folks. But data is continuing to grow. A lot of VDC folks I was talking to through last year, they kept busy. There was no slowdown for a lot of these shops where they were still bidding, they were still designing, they were still trying to fill their backlog. And so data kept on growing. And now the challenge was, how do I get access to these Revit files, these point cloud scans? How do we continue to collaborate in a way where we're not sitting in a coordination meeting, we're not sitting in an office? So I think to one point, data is continuing to grow. And then there was a report, right? 2,400 plus startups in the AEC space. There's data coming in from all different angles and all different sort of solutions, right? You've got, of course, your big platforms, the Procores and Autodesks of the world, but then there's 2,400 other players that are all trying to get a piece of that. So, trying to imagine these contractors now, like jigsaw puzzle, if you will, of, I've got data, I've got a lot of it, I've got it spread out now, in multiple silos. And I think there's a really interesting movement here, right? And I think Lil had talked about in one of your past episodes, sort of the common data environment, I might call it an info hub, but we really need to think about sort of, maybe the cliches, the digital foundation or digital infrastructure for which all these things can start to really flow through. And I think the model in this whole, we're going to have a lot of data. We need to have some single kind of pane through the windows, like that Salesforce model, where they've had, a huge ecosystem of partners and apps that really gave them an edge. And I think, Procore, I think a lot of credit to Procore and their ambitions on building that ecosystem, very much that model. And even where I am at Egnyte now, I think we have a really good narrative around the integrations that Egnyte has, where, yeah, it's not strictly about folders and files, but it is about all these other data and data streams that are coming in that have to flow through and go from one system to another. And I think there's just this mentality of like, we've got a lot, we've got too much. We've got PMs probably sifting through hundreds of RFIs a week. And if they're saying they're keeping up, it's because they're working 20-hour days, right?
Right.
That's the part that's not sustainable. But I think to where we see the industry, building these ecosystems of partners, this interoperability, what Nathan is doing, and I know Lillian and Walker are part of the CPC. But yeah, I love that what's happening there. And it's really the question is, where's the ultimate push going to come from? There's a lot of activity there. Is it going to be the contractors and customers that are going to provide that ultimate push? Or is it the vendors like the Procores and Autodesks that are going to be there? So it'll be an interesting dynamic, but yeah, there's some really good things happening right now. I think data is everywhere. We need to really start to think about, how do we get a single pane of glass, if you will, to all that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned it in that answer there, that there's just so much data coming at construction projects that realistically, how do you really keep up with it on any sort of practical level? And should you really even try?
Yeah, and there's that, and then there's also paper still out there, right? Part of some of the origin stories, and I think Jake Olson had said in sort of one of our days at Data was, we're on job sites. You think about the GCs that are the most advanced of the most advanced, right? 5D and drones and goggles, and at the end of the day, their trade partners are still on paper. And so maybe it's sort of there's also maybe a secondary message, which is the benefit of all this digitalization is not equally distributed. And how do we bring that last 15%, 20-25% up so that we can get that, complete end-to-end? Let's get it all digitized. And so we can see it, we can analyze it, we can, reduce errors in the field.
Yeah. So how should the industry view data? What's a healthy view for construction around data?
Oh boy, what's a healthy view of data? I think it means different things to different contractors. This will be a tough one. I think we'll probably have to ping pong around, but I've seen, we've got the top, let's call the top tier GCs, right? They've got analytics end to end. They've got huge systems in place where they're collecting everything. Another contractor that I know very well, they've got this, this ambitious project to really start to look at their entire history of all their past projects. They normally track it already, just to the notion of just cost control and progress tracking, but having all that collected and analyzed, and now some manner of a machine learning or algorithmic sort of calculation on risk. So I think in those cases, data is like their edge. They're going to figure out, okay, when we start seeing this kind of activity at 20-25% of the way into the project, we're able to forecast and sort of predict risk much more accurately than waiting for the traditional 80% of the project to be done. So I think there's a real opportunity to sort of use the data to clearly have a competitive advantage, but also save their margins, right? We know rework and it's a big problem, and it eats up a lot of margin. And if we can get a little bit more efficient there, I think the whole industry will benefit. The data, I think, in those examples, it'll be a clear, competitive advantage if they can sort of, analyze and predict risk and control risk in a much more effective way. I think the smaller and sort of mid-sized contractors, it's hard to know yet. Will they have the kind of budgets to kind of put these systems into place, or will they sort of be the downstream, benefactors from some of these large GCs that are doing these things? I think there's a little bit of both happening right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's kind of two mindsets, it seems, around data. One is collect everything, even if you have no idea how you're going to use it, just collect it. And then maybe someday when you figure out what you want to use that data for, it'll be there. And so you have this huge data lake that you can draw from. And there's some pros to that. I get that argument. And then you have the others of like, let's just collect the data that we need to get the job done and not worry about the rest because we're not using it right now anyway. So who cares? And there's some validity to that as well too. And I think it's the interesting thing that people have to kind of think through with construction is what is the plan for the data? How are you going to actually use it? So you can have this huge data lake, but if you're not really doing anything with that data, or you have no plan around your data, you're just collecting random pieces of information, what good is it really doing you? I think I'm a big believer in have the plan and then work from there.
Yeah, I think the problem too is sort of that's driving that storage has become cheap. You know, if we were probably 10 years ago and storage was expensive, there would probably be more discipline right around, oh man, we just can't have terabytes and terabytes of data because this is going to put a big dent in our IT budget. But yeah, I think cost of storage is a two-edged sword. It's a good thing because it's cheap, but now it's like people have, let's call less discipline around, I just want to collect everything, IBM and sort of that big data story that they would spin, they have the fourth V, volume, variety, and there's volume, variety. I can't remember the third V, but IBM had this fourth V to describe big data, which is veracity, right? What is the data? What is the data that's important to us? We don't know. We're just going to collect. And so there is an interesting dilemma now. Yeah, what is important? What is not? And I think to maybe, possibly if we don't jump too far ahead, is the other R word, which is ransomware now. It's like, okay, I just lost all my data. I know I'm collecting a lot of it. What do I actually need to recover? And we can maybe hold that for a second, segue to the next topic.
Yeah, it's a perfect segue. So with all this data being collected right now, what does protection of that data really look like for construction industry? How should they be starting to kind of wrap their minds around that?
That's a big one, right? We've got news all the time with the Colonial, the other meat processing plant. The name escapes me, but there is ransomware is a problem, and AEC is not immune to it. There is no more of this security through obscurity situation, right? That might have been true 3, 4, 5 years ago, but we see studies around sort of the AEC is being targeted more and more. Interestingly, sort of the Egnyte and what we're trying to do with our customer base, and we've got several thousands of customers, is to also introspectively look at incidences of ransomware. And we'll be preparing a report here soon, but there is some very objective indicators that AEC, especially sort of as we look at some of the data that we have in analyst reports, are that AEC is being disproportionately targeted for these things, right? Why? In one sense, hackers kind of know now, there's no tolerance for schedule slip, right? We've already got tight schedules, and wiping out, your entire project document set, all your drawings and everything for a day or 2 or 3 or a week is just not going to happen. They can't tolerate that. They're going to pay. And that's an unfortunate reality of sort of this industry. But I think to one degree, we need to all have this wake up call, right? Which is, it's coming for you one way or another. A lot of CIOs that I still keep in contact with, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And so, then it's like, okay, what is your recovery strategy? What is your resiliency strategy to say, we're going to get hit. It's inevitable at some point. Also you have what we call a big attack surface. You've got your, not only your office staff, you've got your field staff, and then on a project, you probably got 20 or more other trade partners that are also in and out of your environment. So you've really got a lot of ways to sort of be exposed here, just the nature of the industry. But really going back to that, we cannot tolerate schedule delays already. We already have enough. It's like, what is it? Is it materials? It's labor, and it's equipment, right? Those are kind of the 3 big factors for any given project. And I think ransomware is probably a 4th legitimate factor now in managing and navigating your project. So it's a big deal, and I think we got to wake up and say, look, there's got to be ways we got to think about, again, not collecting everything as we just kind of talked about, because to some degree, or at least if you're going to collect everything, know what you need to get on day one versus day 3, right? In your recovery, if you're in a recovery situation.
Yeah, definitely. So, how should the construction industry, what should they do in response to all these ransomware attacks lately? I'm here on the East Coast, so I felt the pain of the Colonial Pipeline. And it seems like those are popping up just more and more and more all the time. There's, a couple that have come up in the news since then. Well, what should the response be for the industry?
I think we need to be prepared, right? So it's not a question of if, it's going to be when. So then it's like, all right, what do we need to recover on day 1? So some of these things, without necessarily saying, not calling out a specific technology per se, which is, what is your internal controls? What is things that are active or current data versus things that are archivable, right? We might call it retention policies, but having some sort of, again, without being specific around the technology, but something around a retention policy. Hey, do we move things that are 7 years old off into some other secondary storage? Why? Because we probably already passed our sort of litigation phase. We don't need to have to worry about holding on to that project data anymore. But then it's like you're holding everything because it doesn't cost you a lot probably, but then now you lost everything. And if your recovery time is now 1 whole week because you need to recover the whole world versus, I just need these, top 20 folders. There's a big difference in retention policy. I think as one strategy is something everyone needs to be mindful of. It's a C-suite topic too, right? Especially for AEC firms. The CFO is about managing risks, but sort of the risk to the whole business too. I just lost my entire document set for all my projects. We can't tolerate that. But if and when we do get hit, what are we recovering first off? How do we make sure our project teams, our field teams, our trade partners are still able to operate? Because that's how we make money on the project. And that's the first thing that should be sort of considered is what's important, right? Do we need to restore all of our accounting files? Yeah, arguably it's important, but what's more important? Is it so we can keep running the business, or do we need to, what do we need to recover at the end of the day? 3,000 customers, AEC customers that we've got, and sort of that, when I said introspective, look, there was a really interesting data point around AEC of all of our, let's say 18,000 total customers, the percentage of AEC customers make up half of the ransomware incidences that we've seen in the last 6 months. So there is a very interesting data point, objectively speaking, where it's like AEC is absolutely being disproportionately targeted, almost at a factor of 2x. So it is a matter, again, going back to what was said, which is it's not a if, it's a when.
There's certain pieces of information that you should care about more, and you should have that going into it, have that kind of hierarchy in your mind so that what if and when the attack happens, you go, okay, these are the pieces that we're going for first, and this is what we need to do to bring it back up.
Employee awareness is another one. Again, I mentioned the attack surface, which is you've got not only your office people, but your people in the field, your trade partners, but having some we do it for safety, right? We have the safety toolbox talks. We have a huge focus around safety. I think there's probably a good argument here is like, well, can we start to weave in some, I'm not talking about heavy 3-day, training sessions, but if we're making toolbox talks and safety part of the culture because we want to have a successful project, right? Well, then I think maybe we ought to think about weaving in some manner of this, employee training, employee awareness, how to look for some of these suspect emails, or, some of these emails that might look a little bit weird, but, pick up the phone and just call that person. Like, did you send me this invoice? I mean, it might be as simple, because we have so much technology today, right? But it might be as simple as calling that person, be like, is this a real request for an invoice, or did you really meant to send me this tracking number that I'm trying to wonder where my boiler is? It could be that simple, but if we think about safety on job sites and as a daily topic, maybe at some point we need to also consider, especially those that have computers, at least, some awareness of what ransomware, the impact, risk of it, but also some signs to look out for.
Yeah. So you're talking about it there a little bit, but what kind of contingency plans or processes should people have in place in case and when the worst happens then?
Yeah, kind of think we're looping it back to that retention sort of idea. Be ready to, if you're not having that conversations, but ask the IT side of the house, have we tested, do we do regular testing of our recovery? What's our backups look like? This is more of an IT, I think, sort of oriented topic, but it's important to keep the IT guys involved because, again, it's not a when, it's an if. But what is the strategy? It's like, yeah, we need to be prepared. Have we restored a folder just to test? If we're doing tape backup, for example, which a lot of guys are still doing tape backup, how are you storing your tapes? Are you rotating your tapes? And some of these I would call fundamental sort of IT things. But yeah, what is the strategy here? It's making sure your IT guys are in lockstep, IT guys and girls. They have the backups ready to go. They've tested it. But to the retention strategy, know what is needed on day one, because it's going to happen. You're going to need to restore. And if you don't have your backups in line, you don't have it tested out and ahead of time, you could be in for a lot of hurt. The wake up call is here. It's like, are you going to respond in kind, or are you just going to get whacked? And then now you're done with the project.
Yeah. So given all the data security concerns, is having a single source of truth, or the common data environment that we started with, is that a potential cause for concern? Because it would make accessing that data easier because you get everything's contained right there.
I think there is an argument that with a single source of data, a single source of truth, that you can have consistent security policies, right? Or that you can make sure, we talk about those 2,400 startups, how many different logins do you have? And then of those different logins, let's say 12 or 13 or 14, for example, how many of those different logins might you have different security roles or security access roles? And if you're thinking about, like, I'm the IT, leader for this organization, how many different silos and how many different security profiles might I have to worry about for a given user? Where then if we think about sort of flipping that model, which is common data environment or the info hub, single source of truth, now there is a real legitimate opportunity to say, look, we can apply a consistent security policy to all of our data, right? PM should only be able to do this much. They shouldn't be able to access, folders in these other areas. Field staff, similarly, right? We should not be allowing them to be deleting things potentially. And so having a single sort of control point does have its advantages, rather than leaving things fragmented or into different silos, because you just lose track of all those different security profiles. But with one sort of, again, info hub and one security policy, there is a great benefit, I think, to saying, look, this needs to happen, because now you've got people with different access roles. They're accessing things they shouldn't. People are accessing contract data, which they should be able to see. And so why did that happen? Because we got lost, because we had too many different silos and too many different systems running around. We see more happening. We see more happening. Yeah, that more to come there, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's flash forward a decade. What do you think is going to be the biggest change that happens in the construction industry?
Oh man, I mean, I think the big one is just the supply and demand of labor. So we are going to see an acceleration of robotics of some manner. I don't think completely removing the labor element, but it's a have to have, right? You can't continue to build at the rate we're building and knowing that, the skilled labor force is not growing in lockstep with demand. So I think the big sort of factor that I see is, the need for robotics to a degree. We've already seen, Spot, right? The robot dog, and some of our other customers are starting to use like robotic layout, and we start to see more of that efficiency coming through robots. But then, the labor itself, and I think there's a drywall robot, there's a rebar tying robot out there. And so we'll see more of those in the coming years. Technology gets cheaper, right? More pervasive, and that, Moore's law kind of an idea. I think robotics will be big, and we'll see sort of that notion of like labor will be augmented. I don't think it'll be replaced. I think a lot of people share that same opinion, but they'll definitely be augmented purely because it's needed. It's not necessarily a luxury at this point. It's like you can't keep building and putting up buildings and expecting your skilled labor force to work 60, 70 hour work weeks. I mean, they might love the OT, but at some point you burn out or it's a serious safety hazard. Some kind of augmentation. I think the robotics is going to be one. AI, I think, is another one, right? Getting smarter at that risk management part of it too. We starting to see some really great solutions with AI and being more predictive, whether it's a safety situation or a scheduling situation or a material, which is a whole nother problem. How are these jobs going to be impacted now with material shortages or even skyrocketing material costs? That's another element. But AI, robotics, and I think the third one is 3D printing, right? We'll see the ability to prefab and 3D printing kind of combined. That will be, I'm sure, a game changer. There'll be ways where you get huge prefab shops now with a big ass printer sitting in there, and you're prefabbing out whole piping systems or something, electrical systems, and you're able to just ship it out. But it's all getting done faster, more modular. There'll be some of that too. I think there's going to be some of that. 5G will be probably the biggest one, I think. So kind of adding a fourth, right? What can we do now with virtual models in the field, on the job site, on the floor, right? With name your goggle or your iPad or your tablet. I think there's going to be some really interesting things around 5G that'll really continue to push a lot of that heavy, we'll call dense data out further to the edge, right? This is because it can't do it now. Either the bandwidth's not going to support it or the compute power is not there. But 5G will be, I think, a big catalyst to saying, look, can we unlock more of that compute power because we can actually stream a lot faster? There'll be some big ones there, I think. So more, I'm sure, will develop, and 5G is just coming out. So I'm really interested to see what kind of solutions really start to capitalize on 5G.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the next decade of contact is going to be a pretty exciting time, and probably strap on your seatbelt because it's going to be a wild and crazy ride. And there's a whole lot that's going to happen in the next 10 years that we have no idea about yet, but it's going to be an exciting time.
Well, it was like drones, right? 10 years ago, probably drones was barely a thing.
Yeah.
And I remember back at the contractor, we were one of the first kind of playing around with drones, and the value was, getting on and off the job site faster. Right. And so, what do we have now? We have drones everywhere. It's almost commoditized to a degree. And that was a relatively short period of time, right? Exponential growth. We might throw around that term a lot, but innovation and disruption is moving faster and faster. And there'll be some pretty major shifts, I'm sure, here in this sector in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, definitely. Well, how do people get a hold of you and find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, you can reach me at my email address, which is ksoohoo@egnyte.com. Happy to talk about more about what we're up to with sort of the mitigation of ransomware. How do we continue to maximize your content, right, which is basically your project documents. But yeah, I'd love to have those conversations. Also reach me on LinkedIn. I'll send, I'll send you the URL or something like that.
We can post it in the show notes.
Those are probably the two best ways to get a hold of me. But as Todd, you said, been part of this industry for 15 years. There's much more to be done, and I think the journey with Egnyte is really interesting. We're really thinking about building that digital foundation, if you will, so that you can have all your things flow through it, protect it as one sort of single pane of glass, share it accordingly, and get through your jobs more successfully, reduce the errors and rework.
Nice. Well, last question for you. What does innovation mean to you?
Innovation means doing something differently that we did before so that somebody can go home at a decent time. This is a people industry, right? Until robots could take over, which I still don't think this is going to be the case, but this is a people industry. So innovation has to be around enabling the trade worker, the PMs, the operations folks, everyone, safety folks, everyone involved to doing their job in a more efficient, faster manner. So either they can take on more work or they can get home at a decent time, or that we can be more safe and make sure everyone goes home with 5 fingers, 10 fingers and 10 toes.
I love it. Yeah. At the end of the day, you're exactly right. It's a people first industry, and that needs to stay the focus. I love that. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Kevin. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for having me.